You're listening to Conservation Connection.
Presented by Last Chance Endeavors.
I'm Chance.
I'm Sarah Catherine.
And we are a husband and wife team that runs an environmental education nonprofit focused on connecting students to the environment.
Here on Conservation Connection, we do just that by introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day across the globe.
We talk to professionals in the world of conservation science and the environmental movement, and we ask them about their career,
their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
This episode is brought to you by the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in Nevada City, California.
Wild and Scenic presents environmental and adventure films to illustrate the Earth's beauty,
the challenges that our planet faces,
and the work communities worldwide do to protect our home.
Join us as we discover just how these dedicated people are working to protect our planet.
Let's get to the show.
Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Conservation Connection. We are here at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival in Nevada City, California, and I'm very excited for this episode. We are sitting down with Dr. Tim Shields. He is a lifelong field biologist. He is the founder and president of Hardshell Labs, and he's here with his film EcoHack.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We're super excited to have you. You obviously wear a lot of hats, do a lot of things. So what should we start with? Okay, I think first tell us a little bit about what exactly is Hardshell Labs.
Hardshell Labs is a business that emerged from I had a 35-year career of watching desert tortoises, which is my favorite organism on the planet, decline by 95%. My job was to document this decline. At the time, we kind of figured there would be problems, but we had no idea that this species was heading for a 95% decline. And so I took excruciatingly detailed notes on this environmental catastrophe. And I reached a breaking point where I just felt like all I'm doing is taking notes. It's like, I want to do more for these animals. The note-taking was vital. We had to document the decline. But I reached a breaking point where it's just like I have to do something, at which point I began to look for tools to intervene. And that process was, what are the threats to this species? They are many. What are the threats that are most manageable? And then what are the tools that can manage that threat? And I boiled it down pretty quickly to raven predation as the primary threat that was manageable. It's important to do that. It's like you have to be, in a case like this, which is it's like house of fire kind of thing. I'm sort of an ecological first responder. You get on scene and it's like...
You're triaging, right? What is
Absolutely.
The immediate threat that we can
Correct.
manage?
What's the immediate manageable threat? What are the ones that we have to buy time for the species? And that's kind of how I view my role, is just buying time. There's a lot to work out, but Hardshell is a first response. It's kind of like an ambulance for an ecological catastrophe. It is a catastrophic decline of this animal, which is a familiar story on this planet at this time. This happens to be that part of the fractal universe of environmental crisis that I'm dealing with. How's that? Is that a reasonable?
No,
that's
what I'm doing.
perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great
and
explanation.
a correction. I'm not a doctor. I was in grad school and it became clear to me, I got a master's degree and it became very clear to me, I'm not an academician. I'm what we call a dirtbag biologist. I just went out in the...
You want to be in the mud. You want to be in the dirt.
Yeah. And the PhDs ended up having to crank out, publication after publication. And that just wasn't my gig. And when I went out, like fresh out of getting my master's degree, I walked into this tortoise job and it was set to be multi-decade. And it's multi-decades of me just being out in the desert with the critters. And I learned a hell of a lot. I haven't cranked out publications about it. I've had some, but that's just a minor correction.
I love that. And thank you for correcting me. Of course, I want to be given good information,
Yeah.
but I love the perspective that, I don't know, I think a lot of times people think of academia and science and understanding the natural world from a scientific perspective as this, like, you start with undergrad and then you do a master's and then you get a PhD and then you can do real work that helps the world. And I myself am still learning that, hey, that's, to break that mentality,
Right.
because, I have a bachelor's degree. I'm not doing research, but I'm still, having conversations like this and trying to get this information out to as many people as I
Right.
can. I'm still part of
Absolutely.
what's going on, even though I'm not a PhD.
I would argue that at this point, communication is way more important than generating more data. We have enough data. What we don't have, and what you guys are doing, is transmitting what is being learned in the field to a wider audience. So, and that's a lot of what Hardshell does too. It's like I spend a lot of time talking to people and trying to distill what we're learning into manageable chunks of information for as many people as possible. Yeah. I think that's the true crisis. It's a crisis of human consciousness, and we all have to wake up really fast. And so that's, good on you. And
well, thank you.
And the labels, and it's just like, oh, I don't have a PhD. Dr. Christine Berry managed the project that I spent 35 years on. She did all the PhD stuff. She cranked out the publications and ran interference for me so that I could go out and have the best of it, which was hanging out with tortoises. She was in an office writing papers, and I was out hanging out with tortoises, which is a way better gig.
Oh,
way
yeah.
better.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Doing the fun stuff.
Tortoises are so cool. Oh,
so
my God.
I want to talk a little bit, like, give us sort of a snapshot of their life history and the threats that are facing them. And
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So the interesting thing about them is that they're very similar to us in many important ways. They have roughly the same lifespan we do. They have roughly the same schedule of sexual maturation and reproduction that we do. A tortoise starts off, they build houses, they engineer their landscape to a degree. They do all these things, and they have incredibly interesting and subtle social interactions. It's a long-lived animal. 100 years is not, they used to live, I think, regularly to 100 years old. They would have decades-long relationships with the members of their community. They have communities of interacting elements, which originally, prior to the catastrophe that we have caused them, were very stable communities with very low turnover rate. So everybody knew everybody else. There are sexual preferences. Females liked certain of the guys. It wasn't just the strongest males inseminated the females. The females, they choose their mates. I can get way into the sex lives of desert tortoises are astounding. At any rate, they have, they build these burrows. They live most of the time underground.
Which makes sense for a desert tortoise that
Absolutely.
needs some sort of shelter.
Yes. And what they have done is insulated themselves by building these structures. They insulate themselves from the most extreme elements of their environment, and then they choose when to be up on the surface, like when there's food available or mates, when the temperature is right, where they aren't getting cooked, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of parallels. There are a lot of differences too. Like their sex lives are very different from ours in interesting ways, but there are these parallels. And so when you're with them and you start to learn them, you feel this kindred aspect. It's just like, here's another package of DNA that's doing a lot of things similar to how we do it. So there's a kind of a familiarity with that. And had I had the chance to study them in an earlier age, that would have been a wonderful life, because there were so many, and they're so interesting. They're so cool. But I got started right at the tail end of the golden age and at the onset of the catastrophe. And there were a series of sort of interlocking, interlinked threats to the tortoises that arose simultaneously, all of them ultimately the responsibility of human beings. We were ignorant of what we were doing to them, but the actions we took put them in a world of hurt. So I was studying them, and there were still hundreds per square mile on a lot of the places I was working with them. Like there were tortoises, lots of tortoises, but there were problems.
That's unheard of today.
Oh yeah, it's fossil knowledge. I'm one of the OGs of tortoise field work, and I have memories in my head that will never, it's going to be hundreds of years. My long-term goal is give them enough time to recover, but the recovery will be hundreds of years in the future.
Because they're such a slow reproducing species.
Absolutely. Everything goes slowly with them. And they will need considerably better conditions to make a recovery. But they are capable of the recovery, or I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Right. At any rate, disease. It's quite likely that exotic tortoises, maybe from South America, maybe from Asia, were housed with captive desert tortoises. The alien tortoise bore an organism called mycoplasma, transmitted it to the desert tortoise, which hadn't co-evolved with that organism and had a pathogenic. The problem was, quite likely, those sick tortoises, desert tortoises, either escaped or were let go. And there are numerous examples where we have found tortoises that were clearly domestic tortoises that didn't know what the hell was going on. It's like, right. Where am I?
Where's the guy that gives me food?
Exactly. I found these two one time on this plot I was working on, which was the desert tortoise natural area. And they were red. These tortoises were red. They had lived in red soil somewhere. And I came up on these two, it's a male and a female tortoise, kind of huddled under this creosote bush, and they didn't move. And I processed them, and I didn't even realize till after the fact. It's like, wait a minute, there was red impacted, like those are...
Where did
and I went back from? And I just I grabbed them and got them out of there, because that's probably how the disease was introduced. And then it went across the desert tortoise landscape like a fire. And that was an immediate, catastrophic, very sudden decline in their numbers. So now their numbers are depressed, and now every other threat becomes much more threatening, much more significant.
Because they're already thrown off balance.
They're thrown off balance, and their numbers are really low. So driving them to extinction from a high number, any of those other threats, it would have been a much more gradual process. But now you have very little left to work with, and you've still got a massively increasing number of ravens and burgeoning raven populations. That's the one I ended up focusing on. Coyote numbers are increasing as well, because these two opportunistic predators are taking advantage of human alteration of the landscape. But then there's invasive plants of low nutritional quality displacing the normal natural food items of the tortoise. And then there's drought and climate change and on and on. And then throw in some off-road vehicles while you're at it, and the tendency of human beings to grab them and either eat them or take them and stick them in their backyards. And those are just the high points of the threat regime for tortoises.
So there's a lot
of rough.
Yeah.
We have made life really rough on these animals.
And there's just so much that has to be done for a successful recovery, right? We have to change the landscape and change the way that we think about and interact with these organisms.
We have to change human behavior. That's the toughest.
That is the tough. Real trick.
And that's what I'll get to when I talk about how we're approaching this.
Yeah, and I feel like that is the perfect transition, everything you talked about for eco-hack, exclamation point. So as you said, you're kind of focusing mainly on the threat of these ravens, and I have not yet seen the film. Very excited to see it this weekend. But what I know from the film, as we were deciding who to interview while we're here at Wild and Scenic, is you work with ravens and lasers and exploding tortoise shells. That's what I got, and I'm really excited to hear about
drones
all of
too.
those things.
There's drones in
drones.
there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, drones. Forgot the drones.
So I started, and it was just like, I'm a Luddite, and I'm out there. I know how to operate a 35 millimeter camera, little else technologically. And I loved that. It's like simple, go out, take notes, da, da, da. But now it's like, okay, what is available? The first thing that occurred to me was radio-controlled airplanes to scare ravens away. And it didn't sound very feasible to me at the time, but it was a starting point. And this is like one of the messages. It's just like, even if the idea seems daffy at the time, start somewhere, then take the idea, find somebody else who says, oh, instead of radio-controlled airplanes, you should think about drones. Oh, I knew of military drones, but I knew nothing of quadcopters or any of that. This was 2011.
It's one of those things where you have to start somewhere. It doesn't have to be perfect.
It doesn't have to be perfect.
You just have to start.
Right. And so it was like I stumbled into drone world and was like, oh, these things are really agile. They weren't very good at 2011, but by now they're incredible machines. Incredible. So drones were part of it. But in searching out drones, I went to Edwards Air Force Base, talked to their base biologist, and he said, you should think about lasers. I'd never thought about lasers. And he shows me this video of a guy steering a flock of geese with a laser beam. And I contacted this guy.
How does that work?
Well,
I'm sure he'll tell us.
I will.
I'm impatient.
We got to get this done in a half hour. Take it as read that avian vision is very different from ours. And we're still figuring out how it works. We're not exactly sure, but from behavioral evidence, it's a highly irritating presence in their life. Birds have 5 visual cell types as opposed to our 2. So they're monitoring many more wavelengths in very many different ways. And I think what lasers do, it's not that it blinds them, but it selectively removes. It would be like all of a sudden, you can't see the color green. It turns gray. So part of the information in your world is cut down. And I think that's what's happening and it just freaks them out. It's just like, I don't like this, and they go away. And the fact is they go away. And the fact is, totally serendipitously, ravens are by far the most laser sensitive birds we've worked on this extensively. We've tested different color lasers on 100 species of birds. Ravens are by far the most laser sensitive. Thank you.
That's fascinating.
Yes. And completely, like I said, it was an accident, but a very happy accident.
Great for you.
Yeah. So Pete Bitar comes out with his lasers. We try them out. It's like, it was an OMG moment.
I can't even imagine what that was like.
You can't imagine. You can't imagine it, especially because prior to that, the most elaborate tool I had for raven control was a rock. I would see ravens land on my tortoise plots, and I would pick up a rock and I would chase after them and I would throw it at them. I never got close. It was all I had.
They're like, what are you doing?
Exactly.
It was really more for you than for the raven.
Absolutely.
You had to do something.
It was the gesture.
Yeah.
But now I've got this machine that can reach out over a mile away and displace a raven. It's like, that was a game changer, as they say.
That's crazy.
So now, like, the laser stream of things is, how do we configure these machines? The problem is the labor intensity and the cost intensity of having one human being operate one laser at one place. And so what we're working on right now is a networked laser that allows a single operator to monitor multiple places at once via cameras associated with lasers. And we're right on, we have a working system now, and it's tremendously exciting.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. And it's working incredibly well. We have it at one site, which is a sewage treatment plant, which is a subsidy site for ravens, which is a place ravens get the calories they need to make many babies, and they bring their babies there. It's an easy life. Like skimming this fat off the surface of these treatment ponds is like raven nirvana.
That's like at the crux of the issue is that human behavior makes it easy for an opportunistic organism to get a bunch of calories, grow a big population, and now this population has to find more food.
Right.
And so they're eating the desert tortoises that don't grow as fast as the raven
population.
It's
so nice talking to somebody who gets it that easily. Yes, that is the crux. The crux is that we're subsidizing these things and allowing their numbers to, geometrically rise. And I've witnessed that over the course of my career. When I started, there were ravens around, but nothing like there is now. So we have to undo that effect if we're going to keep tortoises around. And it turns out, because ravens are extremely intelligent, we have a lot to work with. And so the fun of this is, but also the effectiveness of it is, it's not that the ravens are the enemy. It's that raven consciousness is a raw material we can work with, and they're eminently trainable animals. And so a lot of what I'm getting into now is, now that we have the tools like the lasers, how do we train them to avoid the lasers without ever having to shoot the lasers? And we're working on some intriguing...
And that's interesting because I'm pretty sure, I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I'm pretty sure ravens are one of the groups of animals that have exhibited culture in the sense that they pass information from generation to generation.
No doubt.
So you really only have to teach one generation of ravens to avoid the lasers.
Bingo.
And then it passes itself on.
There's a learning curve. And if you take them past some number of them past the steep part of the learning curve, then it's, remedial lessons or occasional refresher courses. But you've established the relationship. The reason I am so confident of this is that one time I came to this spot. It's very near this sewage treatment plant. It's an organic composting facility, industrial scale. And I had worked with ravens there with lasers, a little bit with drones, but mostly with lasers. And I got out of my car, and 700 ravens left the ground because...
They're like, it's Tim.
Exactly. It's actually, absolutely. And so it's happened every time since. That's 2.5 years, 3, that might be 4 years ago. And now it's like, it's ingrained in that population of ravens. When a dude gets out of a car parked in that position, it's best to leave.
Isn't that crazy that information is so ingrained that all you have to do is step out of the car?
And we can work with that because now it's the threat of the laser rather than the laser. You don't want to shoot the laser. You want the effect of them, of their community having had this interaction in the past with this technology to evoke a response without ever having to fire the thing. And we're getting there. We're going to get there.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely confident that we're going to get there. And,
it sounds like it.
And the technotort is a similar idea. We have spent years refining and perfecting how to make a fake juvenile tortoise, because juvenile tortoises are the ones that ravens prey on. And we got there. It's like 3D printing, really studied what's the coloration of tortoises, how to mimic that. And we tested these things first, passive versions of them, and ravens attacked them like crazy. We used that alone as a way to measure raven predation pressure across the Mojave Desert. Everything else was just happenstance, people running across a tortoise carcass. Right. This was a setup. So it's the difference between coming on a crime scene and doing the forensics as opposed to setting up a sting operation where you control the position and many more of the factors of the interaction. Once we both figured out where the predation pressure is the most intense and the threshold population of ravens necessary to continually suppress tortoise recovery, then we weaponize the things. And there's, again, another miracle is there's artificial grape flavoring is like pepper spray for birds.
Interesting.
It's called methylanthranilate. It's completely non-toxic.
Yeah.
But it's highly irritating to birds and not to mammals or reptiles. And it just smells like too strong a grape smell to us. But to birds, it's like, oh my God.
Like, get out of here.
Exactly.
This is the wildest episode we've ever had.
I know.
It's so,
I'm loving this.
The connections are so wild. And I'm an agnostic philosophically. I don't think we as human beings have the capacity to understand systems that transcend our scale of operation. Like we don't last very long as individuals. Our species has been around for, arguably 2 million years. Our agricultural culture is 10,000, 12,000 years old. Like
a blip.
We're babies. We are babies. And so thinking that we understand what's going on up there. But I will say there are mystical aspects to what I have encountered and the things that are happening along the way. The fact that methylanthranilate exists, has been synthesized by human beings, that somebody somewhere figured out that birds hate this stuff. It's just like,
And then it
it's
has
the
no
perfect.
like deleterious effects to anything else in the
No.
ecosystem.
No, it's in Welch's grape drink. It's like we're drinking it all the time. It just happens to bug the shit out of birds. Sorry, I said a bad word, but
So you were using that with the
yeah,
3D
And
printed tortoise shells.
So another thing I have to say also is that the results of this work, it's the fruit of the labor of hundreds of people. I'm sort of the front man for this thing, but like we work with extremely talented engineers who figure out, I come to them, I say, we want an exploding tortoise. And they say, here's how we could do it. And now we have, the current version is there's a canister buried underneath this thing. The technotort, the little lure, sits on top of a spindle. And that spindle is tied to a sensor that tells the mechanism I'm now being attacked by a raven. And it's even like a tiny tap by a raven's beak, which is always the preliminary. Ravens are really cautious, so they come up, and we have incredible funny videos of these things. and you'll see them in EcoHack, actually.
Yeah.
So if they tap really lightly, nothing happens. But as soon as they sort of like, oh, it's tortoise, I'm going to eat this thing, in the face. Or if they try to tip it over, because a lot of attacks are, they flip them over. There's a soft spot or a thin spot in the shell on the underside, and ravens know exactly where it is. But this thing goes off in their face and
sprays them with this artificial grape
right
spray.
in the face. And they've got all their mucous membranes right next to the technotort, and off it goes. And it's like, it's like, imagine wasabi. Like a wasabi shot in your eyes, your nose, and your mouth simultaneously.
It's like every time you try to peel a banana, or occasionally when you peel a banana, it squirts wasabi at you.
Absolutely.
You're going to stop eating bananas,
Exactly.
even though 1 in 100 is the one that does it.
That's what we're expecting. And so this also is something to, the way I look at it is we're inserting memes into the social network of ravens. And this is like,
what a way to say it. But that's absolutely what you're doing,
this stuff
right?
a lot. I think I've stew in this stuff, and so and I'm trying to be a communicator, and people understand memes, and they understand social networks, and an analog is happening with ravens. It's just there's a different mode of transmission of information, but it's the same.
That's what a meme is, right? It's
Yeah.
a repeatable piece of information that travels through a community.
Correct.
And is understood by everybody in the same way.
And like my wife is the meme monitor in our family, and she just shows me these things. I don't spend any time looking for memes, but as soon as I look at them, they're very information rich, and importantly, they're funny, and so they carry the information with humor, and that's a segue to what the real point of my work is, and the work of a bunch of people who are helping, is to turn environmentalism from a depressing litany of unfolding horrors, which I have witnessed. In my favorite animal is there's 5% compared to what I started with, which was already a reduced number of tortoises. Humans are joy-based organisms. Many organisms are, but humans particularly are joy and play-based organisms. They're not guilt-based organisms. Guilt can work temporarily, and disaster scenarios projected by conservation and environmental interests can work for a little while, and did work very well. When I was a kid, I witnessed the rise of the environmental movement, and it was, here's the latest catastrophe. Please help us save the elephants. The elephants are being wiped out. Please help us save the polar bears. The polar bears are being wiped out. On and on. That has been the method of promoting the idea. And I just think it's wrong. I just think it's not wrong, but it's too limited. And there's a whole bunch of people who are turning off right now because there's no joy there. So what we're really working on is we're going to take these tools and democratize the operation thereof, because the internet gives us the chance to allow people in Timbuktu to be tortoise conservationists. And so we're linking many of these devices to the internet, and they will be the basis of, you could call them games or conservation activities. We don't even really know at this point how we're going to structure it. Although yesterday I had a talk with a guy in the game world, and he was very excited about this, and he had very specific instructions. And this is also the point, is we started, like, I shot a laser at a raven in 2012 for the first time. And now we're at the point where we have these things linked to the internet. And the next step is, how do we make that into a game?
You could absolutely get people to play like
they will.
Raven Zapper.
They're already doing it
as an in-browser game, and they're actively saving the turtles,
Absolutely.
the tortoises.
I think it's can't miss.
Oh,
but
yeah.
We're this tiny little business, and it's like now it's like we got to scale this thing up. How do we do that? I don't know how to scale up a freaking business. I became a businessman at age 58. I'm 67 now. I was like, I don't know how to do that, but I know the knowledge exists. And so my thing is, I'm kind of now a cheerleader for this, although I'm still completely involved in the research. Like right now, our team put transmitters on 20 ravens that we trapped at the site where we're doing the raven suppression right now with the remotely operated lasers. And incredible, the picture that's emerging from just tracking these birds. And trackers nowadays are so sophisticated that the hard part is catching the bird and affixing the transmitter. Once that's done, they got a solar panel on them, and they will operate indefinitely. And every 15 minutes, we know where every raven is reporting in every 15 minutes and drawing us a map of the subsidy sites. And it's like all our work is basically done other than going to those sites, talking to the site managers, whoever they are, and offering them relief from their raven hordes. And many commercial interests are equally interested in getting rid of ravens. You know, dairies. Ravens hang out at dairies. They eat the grain, so they're competing with the cows. They get into everything. They poop in the water, potentially passing diseases onto the cows. Like the dairy people are just like, please get rid of these birds.
Get rid of the ravens.
Yeah.
So there's this alignment. It's this beautiful alignment of conservation interests, agency
Financial
interests, commercial interests. It's all coming together. But, you know, my job is to recognize how to bump those threads closer together so that we can weave them. But the weaving is happening, and it's just like, it's tremendously exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, it's like, I can't know that this is going to work. Like I said, it's going to be years and years before we turn the ship around. Well, there are ways. There are ways that we will get an earlier read on whether or not this is working. I'm absolutely certain it's going to work, but then there's climate change and drought and invasive plants and
Right.
The other ones haven't gone away, but we've sort of addressed this one, and we've shown people that this approach to problem solving is fruitful. And I'm confident that other conservationists can adopt this. And it's basically go talk to engineers. It's like characterize the problem you're trying to solve and go find an engineer, because they are optimists. Conservationists are we're pessimistic with good reason based on recent history. Engineers are optimists because as the same natural resources are shrinking that we care about, the tools available to technologists are increasing exponentially. And like these raven transmitters, I work with a guy, Bill Borman, who's a pretty famous raven researcher. And when he was doing this in the early 90s, they had to go out with an antenna and actually go and find each of their ravens.
Radio telemetry.
Correct. It's radio telemetry, but it's primitive. It's pre-World War II technology. And now, as long as we catch them with solar panel development and GPS and satellites and the whole thing, it's like now I open up my computer and it's just like, oh, what's this one doing? Where's it hanging out now?
Yeah.
Right.
So cool.
And it's
That's
not like I get
amazing.
to know where this raven is once a day.
No.
It's I get to know where this
Every
raven is
15
4
minutes.
times an hour.
Yeah.
Wow. What an incredible, I mean, just the sheer size of the spreadsheets that you're making on like location data for these organisms.
And I don't have the skills because I got off the train at a master's degree. I don't have the skills to analyze it, but there's 3 people on the team who are really good at it. And it's just like, we had a call the other day and I just said, here's what I think we could figure out from the data. And what else do you guys see possible? And now we're starting to analyze it. And the picture, no one's ever done an analysis of ravens moving through the human mediated landscape of a desert, which is where they're hanging out, and it's how we'll have to manage them. So, I know some smart people.
Yeah.
And they're on board.
Yeah, absolutely. As they should be.
Yeah,
and
it's cool.
I knew that this was going to be a challenge to fit all of this into 30 minutes. But I do want to ask on that one other question for you before we go is, what was one of the most challenging parts for you while filming EcoHack specifically? So I'm sure there have been tons of things over the years that you've been doing this research, but what is something that was just a huge challenge that y'all had to overcome, assuming there was one?
Yeah, there was. It was the second year of filming was a drought year, so finding sufficient wild tortoises. But we got lucky on that score as well because I know some tortoises. So
he's been doing this for a minute.
Yeah, because it's a really good film. Like the fact that it's about our work and that I occupy the screen a bunch of times is not, I'm not promoting it because of that. It's just a very good piece. I've never been filmed. And so, Brett and Josh came down and Phil, the cameraman, and hung out with me for a long time and went away with hundreds of hours probably of stuff. And I just thought, I wonder what they're going to turn me into. And they just did this incredible job of capturing the spirit and the point of the exercise. And when I first saw it, I was amazed because it's really good and it's fun. It's fun, and fun is good. And people
that's the whole point that we've been talking about, right? Fun is what motivates people. It's what gets people to care. It's what gets people to change their behavior is fun.
And it keeps them in the game.
Yeah.
If the game is fun, they'll keep playing it. And so we just need to figure out how to make saving the planet fun. And I'm absolutely convinced, it's a fun planet. I got to spend 35 years alone in the desert, portions of 35 years, just watching incredibly interesting stuff go on around me, a lot of which was probably unknown to my species. There's excitement there. Certainly with the tortoises. I saw tortoises do stuff that no one's ever seen or taken note of. So how do we distill that? How do I distill all the fun I had, despite the 95% decline? I just had a hell of a good life out in the field. And now I feel like I'm taking one for the team because I spend time talking at microphones instead of out with the tortoises. But this is more important. It's way more important for the good of the system, including our own species, for me to be doing this than spending more time with a dwindling number of tortoises. So
I completely get that. Yeah. And I did my undergraduate in biology and theater because I always knew I wanted to go into something like this, talking about science and making it interesting and engaging for people. But in my undergraduate, I did herpetology at Davidson College. So I did a lot of work with diamondback terrapins on the East Coast and gopher tortoises, indigo snakes. And that, every single day, if I could pick to do this job that I'm doing right now, which I love and I wouldn't change it for the world, or go play with bugs and snakes and lizards in the forest, I'd choose that every time. But this is what should be doing.
Exactly.
This is what matters.
And
more.
We need to be on deck, like all hands on deck, doing the most important stuff now and not, sort of indulging ourselves. But as my career went on, I would wake up in the morning and I would just, there was this, it wasn't a ritual, but there was a daily realization. It's like, I'm going to see something new and really cool today. At least one thing will be brand new to me. And that can be distilled and delivered via the screens. We're a screen-based species now. And anyone who thinks otherwise is delusional. And so now it's like, how do we use the screens?
How do we use it, right? How do we use this as another tool in our arsenal to affect human behavior?
To be better.
Right. Same as using Raven intelligence. It looks from the outside maybe like a problem, and you could look at the screen obsession of our culture as a problem. First of all, take it as a given. And then second, it's like, how do I use it?
Yep.
Utilize that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There you go.
So last question for you as we're wrapping up here. Where can people find EcoHack or learn more about EcoHack?
It's doing the film festival circuit, which I was also unaware of prior to this. There is a film festival circuit. Wild and Scenic is part of the circuit. My understanding is that it's being picked up by the New Yorker streaming service, and that will happen late spring or early summer. Hardshell Labs has a website, hardshelllabs.com, predictably enough. We're pretty lame on the social media front, so don't, I'm embarrassed, but we have a Twitter account. I've never looked at it. We have a Facebook account. I've never looked at it. It's just like...
That's not your job. Your job is to be in the desert with tortoises and then talking to people about the tortoises.
Absolutely. And ultimately we'll get there and we'll amp that part up. But we've been dealing with the gizmos. The gizmos are working brilliantly, and now it's like we'll get to that part.
Awesome.
But go to the website. It'll tell you more.
Perfect. So if you guys are listening and you want to learn more, scroll on down to the show notes. I'll drop a link right there so you can go straight from this to learning more about that. Yep. Tim, thank you so much for being here and sharing some of these incredible stories that you have.
That was fun. Onward.
Onward. Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
We'd love to hear from you. So if you want to reach out, go to our website, lastchanceendeavors.com/contact, and shoot us an email.
We love questions from our listeners, so if you heard something you'd like to learn more about, be sure to let us know.
If you've got a minute to spare, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts will help other conservation-minded people find the show. We'd really appreciate it.
A big thanks to the people working to protect our planet, and a big thanks to you for listening. Don't forget to tune in next time.